and thanks everyone for joining. So when I got invited to give a talk on this day, which is so interesting and is smack bang full with all of this data donation expertise, I was thinking what we can provide as sort of my team with all these other experts in the room. And in conversation with my team members, we thought we would do a talk which both goes through some of the specifics of how we've done data donation studies in our team, but also takes some a more personal approach and discusses personal takeaways on data donation. So I'm so excited to be joined today by both Christina and Val, who've been hands-on involved in some of the data donation work in my team, but I'll explain more about that later on. Next slide. So I think I'll be preaching to the choir about why data donation is so exciting for all of us. What we know is that for so many years, measurement of the digital world has been the one thing that we all complain about when we talk about how low quality quite a lot of the work in this area is. And I personally think that bad quality measurement of social media or smartphone or digital technology use has been holding back our area massively over the last decade or even longer. And for a long time, it didn't really feel like we could solve this beyond collaboration with companies. But increasingly with data rights, especially in the EU and also in the UK context, but I also know in America, putting people's own data rights front and center and allowing them to donate their data to research as well as naturally to other commercial platforms, which was the sort of the main reason some of these rights were put in place, I think has turned the tide and is allowing us to collect a new perspective on social media and digital technology data. That's not to say there's no limitations, and if we do have time for questions, I think I'm increasingly also seeing that data donation is not a panacea or a silver bullet. It's just one other tool we have in our toolbox. Next slide. So in the UK, we, over the next few years, will launch a huge amount of, at least two very large new cohort studies. So for those of you in the US, they're kind of similar to ABCD, but not with a lot of neuroimaging. So the first is being designed now, which is the Adolescent Health Study, which was funded by 60 million from our Medical Research Council, which will track 100,000 young people over the next 10 years. The second is a new birth cohort study, because since the Millennium Cohort Study, 25 years ago, there's been no new birth cohort commissioned in the UK. And that data collection will also be starting next year. So as part of that, the Medical Research Council commissioned my team, I think about 3 years ago, to start looking into data donations and whether that could be integrated into some of these new data donation efforts. Naturally, things have moved on, and there are now many different infrastructures to do with data donation, specifically also a smart data donation service in the UK that has been specifically commissioned by our Economic and Social Research Council. But at the time, we were really one of the first to try to look into these data donation processes. And we used a process where young people would download their own data donation package and then on their own servers would upload those to a custom site, and that site would extract only the data we wanted from their data donation package. The young person could then view that data and actually consent again whether they would be willing to share exactly that data with research. A key part of what we were interested in is whether we could make data donation not just a research tool, but also something young people enjoyed doing by giving them extra insights, for example, through graphs or through interactive data experiences that would help them to generate insights themselves about their digital media use. So we'll talk a bit more about that later on. And then if they did consent to share their data, it would then be sent to us. Alongside this data donation, which we did for both Instagram and TikTok, young people were involved in 2 weeks of intensive longitudinal data collection about mood, body image, as well as what sort of interactions they were having online. And we can now, for example, link those data to start understanding how specific forms of content relates to changes in these outcomes. Next slide. Great. So this wasn't just a research study. Naturally, we are now writing research papers on the basis of this data. We were also interested in this as a pilot to really understand whether you could scale this to potentially 100, 1,000, 10,000, or 100,000 young people. So we did a lot of work pre the data collection. So we had 2 advisory panels of both 13 to 15-year-olds, as well as 16 to 18-year-olds. They went through 2 sessions, the first to discuss the idea of data donation and to understand what sort of research they would be interested in and how they see such a tool being used in their population, because at the time there had been very little work with data donation in teens. The second advisory panel was then to give very specific feedback on our study process, the study materials, and really thinking about what the logistical barriers might be to participation, especially because we were recruiting through schools. We also ran focus groups to design this data usage interface where young people could explore their data. This was very much a pilot, so I now do have colleagues who've moved on and made much nicer data exploration interfaces, but we did show that it works and that young people were quite excited by not just donating their data, but also understanding what might be going on in those data donation packages themselves. Next slide, please. So during study recruitment, we went out into 6 schools and we pitched the study opportunity to over 307 students and had about 550 participants register their interest in the study. We have about 120 completed EMAs and completed data donations, so you can see that there is quite a bit of drop-off, and we can discuss a bit more about that later on. However, because you do see that we pitched this to 300 and then 500 registered, there was quite a lot of excitement going into schools and pitching the study in the right way. And I think my team did an incredible job in that part of the study, getting students excited about this and pitching it in a way that worked for them. And I'll be happy to hand over for that discussion to those who did it on the ground. Next slide. Great. Yes. So as most of my time is actually spent doing emails these days, I do not really understand some of the more personal reflections of what it is like to do data donation in the field. And so I'm really excited to hand over firstly to Valerie Yap. Sorry, Valerie, I misspelled your name on the slide, who's a research assistant in my team who was involved on the ground with the data collection in schools and who can talk you through her reflections. And then later to Christina Haag, who's a postdoctoral researcher in the team and is very much at the moment very busy in analyzing some of this data and can explain to you some of the complexities, because it's not just about getting the data, it's making the most use of it. So yeah, I'll hand over to Valerie.
Thank you, Amy, for the great walkthrough of our work. I remember when freshly joining your group and getting launched into this, from not understanding what data donation even means to running the whole study. It's been overwhelming, but also very fulfilling. So I'll now walk you through share my 3 key takeaways, which is 1, co-design is essential. 2, build trust through clear communication. And thirdly, address ethical concerns. So like Amy said, in our study, we work closely with both youth advisory panels and focus groups, and they play complementary roles. They might look the same on paper, but you can think of it as advisory panels being your board of directors setting the strategy, whereas the focus groups are more like your quality assurance team trying to test the product. So the advisory panels really kept us grounded in what actually matters to young people, not just what we as researchers assume. They help us decide how to talk about privacy, what kinds of data feel sensitive, what makes participation feel meaningful rather than extractive. And then our focus groups come in and become our testing ground, where they help us check if our materials actually worked, whether consent forms made sense, instructions were clear, and if the tone felt trustworthy. They also help us test the donation process itself. They clarified which data they would feel comfortable sharing, and also surface a lot of small but important technical issues or like even confusing steps we hadn't noticed. So bringing both together meant we designed a process that moves adolescents from subjects to partners in research. We think it builds a lot of trust and transparency and make data donation feel safe and purposeful. And I think that's really what drove high engagement and strong data donation rates in the end. So what did young people say in the focus group and also advisory panels? When we first introduced the idea of data donation, most young people hadn't really heard of it before, which is completely fair. Older adolescents around 16 to 18 years old had a very vague sense of what it might mean. They describe it as sharing your information, but their understanding was quite surface level. They didn't necessarily grasp what types of data could be included or how platforms store and process that data. And younger adolescents obviously were even less familiar with what data donation mean. So most of them had never even come across a term, and they assumed that data donation meant giving away their passwords, logins, or personal account access. A few even worried that researchers would see their messages or private content. So how did young people feel after we clarified with them what data donation entails? So like the meme, they're actually very aware that companies are collecting their data without their consent. So during the focus groups, we found them saying that Google is collecting my data anyway without compensating. I would rather donate to a trusted source. So generally, they seem more confident and comfortable in donating data for research, where they were happy to help researchers achieve positive outcomes, especially if it was for what they deem as meaningful purpose, like improving youth mental health or how to better safeguard social media. But their willingness to share data was contingent on some conditions, such as the legitimacy and trustworthiness of research and researchers involved. So they would quote only for legitimate research purposes and make sure it is a trusted site or researcher. So they know that they've lost control of their data to tech companies, but they also see data donation as a way to reclaim some of that ownership by choosing who gets access and for what purpose. So the takeaway for us was that young people are actually quite open to donating their data, but only when it feels transparent, credible, and very clearly explained. So we think it's not just about having very good data security, it's also about how you communicate. Being upfront about who you are, what the study is for, and what will happen to the data afterward is clearly very important for young people. So one of the most important parts of our co-design process was actually developing this data visualization tool, which essentially is an interactive interface where participants could explore their social media usage patterns before deciding what to donate. So you'll be able to see number of videos watched for every hour of the day, number of minutes spent on TikTok. So we used in our focus groups, we used Miro, which is a collaborative whiteboard platform to gather some feedback. We showed them some mock-up visualizations and asked them if they find this interesting, if they find it confusing, and what would they actually want to see about their own data. What came through quite clearly was that young people preferred time-based metric. For example, how much time they actually spend watching videos rather than just the total number of videos watched because they felt like time was a more meaningful measure of engagement, whereas counting videos just felt a bit random or even overwhelming to them. Some of them admitted that they would feel uncomfortable or guilty seeing the total number of videos that watched. It might make them feel judged or anxious about their time management. So they were curious about their habits, but they didn't actually want their data to feel like a moral report card. And the second insight was about the visual design, and it varied by age as well. So younger adolescents would tell us that this early prototype looked a bit too mathematical. They would want it to feel more alive, more color, more pictures, and maybe even animations. So like basically anything that would make the data easier to understand and genuinely fun to explore. And older adolescents mentioned wanting cleaner or more sophisticated design. So not too childish, but still very engaging. And across both age groups, we found the biggest request was personalization. I'm sure everyone here have heard of Spotify Wrapped. So they told us they would want something like Spotify Wrap, how it shows your top artists or songs at the end of the year. So they imagine seeing this their social media data being seeing their top 10 creators, most watched content, or even their peak doom scrolling hours. Sadly, we couldn't fully implement that in this study because of a lot of privacy and data security risks, as like creating individualized summaries like that would mean processing a lot of identifiable content, which would increase the chance of a data breach or accidental exposure of sensitive information, which we don't want. But it's definitely something to consider in the future, as I think there's a real opportunity to design a safe but also privacy preserving ways and give young people this personalized feedback on their digital habits. So the second takeaway is about trust, because no matter how well designed a study is, young people won't share their data unless they trust the people asking for it. So I had these 3 steps. First, lead with validation. When introducing a study, we didn't open with, we are conducting a study. Instead, we asked, what comes to mind when you hear social media and mental health? So in our school presentations, when we were trying to pitch a study, we gave adolescents some post-it notes to write their thoughts. So we can tell that they had a lot of opinions about what they think of social media, such as comparison culture, staying connected, doom scrolling, body image concerns. So this immediately builds trust because you are respecting their expertise on their own digital lives. And the mistake researchers make is launching into study procedures first, and as that can really kill engagement. And secondly, frame data donation as a solution to platform gatekeeping. So we explain explicitly with them the research limitations. That is, platforms had a lot of control on data, on their social media use, but they restrict what independent researchers can study. Like I mentioned just now, young people actually showed strong engagement when they realized platforms were blocking research, and they're actually quite happy to help researchers answer important questions. Finally, build genuine agency and reciprocity. We also told them explicitly that they could share only what they are comfortable with. In our study, we gave them preview, as you can see in the previous slide, how their data would look like and how they could actually select and delete data they're not comfortable sharing. We also didn't tie payment to how much they're donating, or if they choose to not donate, as long as they participated in the process, as we recognize that that will create some sort of pressure to donate. So instead, we offer really meaningful reciprocity through showing them how their data look. And our participants actually recognized that and said they appreciated visualizations as a valuable trade-off. So we feel like that made the exchange feel fair and even empowering. My final key takeaway is about addressing ethical concerns proactively. This is really important because data donation raises a lot of privacy issues that most IRBs haven't dealt with before. As we all know, data download packages contain deeply personal information, like things like mental health references, political views, or even sexuality. So often participants don't realize how much of themselves is embedded in that data. So our goal was to make that process feel genuinely informed, transparent, and also safe. So we had a very comprehensive consent process. We used a plain language information sheet and also included a short comprehension quiz to make sure that participants really understood what they were agreeing to. We also created a short screen recorded walkthrough. In this picture, you can see showing exactly what researchers would see in the data. And we showed them this during recruitment and also posted it publicly on our website. And rather than treating consent as a one-off, we also built in a lot of opportunities for questions at multiple stages, like having Zoom drop-ins through schools or email. We also explained in very simple terms how privacy was protected through pseudonymization, encryption, and secure data handling, and basically what would happen to their data after the study ended. Also, we learned to expect a long ethics review. Ours took several months because the IRB flagged a lot of potential re-identification risks. For example, if a donated video had only a few views, it could still identify someone even if the names were removed. So data download packages, like I said, contain a lot of information and about other people as well. So not just whoever donated their data, but it could also contain information about their friends, their usernames, their comments, private messages, which raise a lot of questions about third-party privacy. So to protect everyone in their networks, we excluded all of that private messages and any data involving interactions. So these steps were quite slow and very frustrating, but we know that these are very important, as we want to not just satisfy IRB what they want, but also build credibility with participants and make our study safer, more transparent, and also more trustworthy. And that's all I have to share today. I've got my link to my preprint if it's been accepted for publication, just going through the final processing stage. So if you are interested about how to run similar data donation studies with adolescents, that is the link. And I'll now pass on to Christina, who will walk us through the logistics and challenges of data analysis.
So I joined Amy's lab earlier this year, and as I'm quite confident with Python and AI models, I thought it would be quite straightforward, the analysis. But in the end, as you will see, at least my takeaway is that it's what is difficult about analyzing these data is a bit less on the technical side, at least when you're used to Python, etc. But it's really more a bit about conceptual thinking. So there's so much data, and what is it that you're really interested in? So and just from this example, as you can see, so we might be interested in depression-relevant content or content in terms of what beauty ideals or what young people consume. And so also the diversity of videos which young persons watch is quite high. So before starting the analysis, you have to be very clear about what you want. And I will provide a high-level example for something we are currently working on. So next slide, please. So the first step is, it depends on which modality you're interested in. So maybe you're interested in audio, so meaning what people are talking about, or maybe you're interested in music. While we're in this study, we're interested in actual visual content. And so the first step here is to create still images. And even though this sounds very simple, it's actually not so straightforward, because you need to decide at which rate you want to sample to create these still images. Of course, you could say the more the better, but also when you have tons of videos, also increase your computing needs quite a bit. So, and here we are actually here we are interested in presentations of females, for instance. So we can sample a bit at a lower rate. And originally, I started by. So I thought it would be a good strategy to just look for changes in the images. So I piloted the thresholds, and every time there was a significant change in the image, the screen still would be taken. But then for some images, for some videos, this worked well. There were many stills created. And then there were other stills where maybe there was a landscape and some minor thing happened, so no still was created, so this didn't really work well. And so I think deciding on a rate is the best approach. But for instance, if you're interested in emotion detection, you would want to sample at a very high rate, because this can really change fast, and this also has implications for for your data analysis. Will it take a week or maybe 3 or so? So this is also really important to think about in advance. Also, we will build in steps for manual checks. Obviously, not all stills, but also the clearer you are in terms of what you want to know and at which rate you need to sample, the easier these manual checks will be, and the more sure you can be that what the model is doing is that you know what the model is doing. So, and in our case, we were then interested in identifying human content. So, so naively here, I thought, okay, just detecting a human. There are really so great multimodal models out there, so clear case, but actually it wasn't that straightforward. So I started off by having the model being very conservative, and then I looked through the stills, and then it was like I don't know, trees and nature, and there was like some fingers of a human in the image, so like this, and this then was a human image. So then also with these models, so here I used a model which worked via prompts, and then you need to really think, okay, how much human do I want? So do I want the face, or do I want the body, or I'm happy with the legs? And this again depends on what specifically you're interested in. So not so straightforward, actually. So this always, also with models which you can prompt, always takes a bit of threshold testing, and before you really go into a larger manual check. And then next aspect is, in our case, we were interested in this study in females. So, and that's also not always this straightforward. Also, how do you instruct this? Obviously, when you only have the images, you cannot ask people what is your gender. You have to somehow go by visuals. And also, I mean, here you see, for instance, a person, obviously a female, from what I would guess at first sight. She has long hair, and she's so we can see enough of her. But if it's only a part of the body, and then it's again more difficult, and then you need to make a decision: how secure or how confident do I want to be? So how strict do I want to be, or where do I put this threshold? So again, what I thought would be straightforward, again, wasn't. And then, so this was, I would say, more pre-processing steps. And then usually in the end, you are more interested in descriptive data, but maybe interested in a more complex psychological construct. Just let's Here I just came up with something what I think people might be interested in. For instance, connection versus disconnection. So, and then this is, I mean, you could maybe go with a multi-model model and then really experiment with prompts and manually check what the model does. Or the other way around is to fine tune an existing, in this case, vision model, and show it, for instance, sample data for the category like connection and the sample and the category disconnection. And so just train the model to see, okay, this is what connection looks like, and this is what disconnection looks like. So both is possible. And I think it depends a bit on how complex it is, what you're interested in. And if you have, for instance, sample materials, like you have already like certain images which you would like to use, or maybe it's very convenient to describe to the model what you're interested in, but still then also you would need a number of checks to really be sure what's happening under the hood. Okay, next slide, please. And yeah, another very important step. So let's assume you came up with a research question, you managed what I'm currently working on all the processing steps. And at the end, you get per still image at whatever rate you have sampled some measure if what you're looking for is in the still or not, or is in the video or not. So, for instance, the video has certain mental health content, or the video includes, I don't know, something problematic here. And then you have like values per video. But again, what do you do with these values per video? So in our case, we connect them to daily life assessments. So, for instance, you might be interested in is there a connection between feeling lonely and watching a certain type of videos which maybe promote loneliness, or people share being lonely or feeling connected and so. But whereas again, I thought this would be straightforward. It's not so straightforward because you will have videos where you do not have any information on. So videos were taken offline. So that you know they were watched, but the information is gone. So you need to make a decision what happens with these videos. Then make a decision. Is it like time spent in a video with a certain construct of interest, what you want to know? What is the time distance? In our case, with the questionnaires. So many decisions to be made. And I mean, we're currently working on a pre-registration. And I think this is a really good thing to do. I mean, in general, but also when you're collecting, working with existing data, because I think this is so many data, it takes ages to analyze them. And if you have to redo this whole thing several times because you had some mistake in conceptual thinking, this is taking really long. Okay, so these are my insight on the data analysis.
Great, thank you. I think what my final reflections are is that I still think this is a really powerful tool, but I think every single step needs to be really, really deeply considered. And I think just to follow on Christina, what Christina was saying, I think a lot of this goes down to really having to deeply think back about what our theory and our research questions are. For example, we've been thinking, is it the amount of seconds you're exposed to certain content that matters, or is it the rate at which you're exposed to certain content, or whether you are or not? And all of these things, we actually don't have those quantified theories in a lot of our literature to be able to make those judgments. So it is really a garden of forking paths to analyze this data, and with not a lot of guidance out there as yet as sort of established norms in how we do so. So thank you both, Valerie and Christina, for persevering, and we're looking forward to answering your questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the, fascinating overview of the different steps involved and openness about the challenges that you've encountered. We have a number of questions that have come in. First is amazing to see the design thinking and co-design process you've taken. In line with the design thinking approach, are there any outlier profiles, subpopulations, or factors that may not be representative of this process as a whole, but are otherwise interesting or capture your attention?
That's a great question. I'm not a design researcher, so I'm trying to parse this question. Valerie, if you understand more, but I think that may not be representative of the process as a whole.
I think they're wondering about, when you got feedback about people's preferences, if you saw that there were subgroups, for example, were there groups of youth who have marginalized identities who might feel less comfortable with certain presentations of material or less comfortable sharing certain types of data?
Valerie, do you want to start?
Yeah. So I think data donation isn't like unique here. So like every other data collection method, it's subject to participant selection bias. And we definitely get more enthusiastic, trusting or like more engaged participants in every data collection method we use. So we probably miss very highly privacy sensitive teens, those with problematic use and they're ashamed of it, or younger teens whose parents are more security concerned. So with that in mind, we did try to recruit them from around the country. So we knew Cambridge students would be very different from young people up north. So we tried to then think about different social economic contexts, different relationships with institutions. So Cambridge students would naturally be more trusting of Cambridge researchers. So different levels of digital literacy and access. So we did try to visit schools around UK cities and towns. So so to get that geographic and socio-economic diversity. Not sure if that answered that question.
Yeah, I think there's now a trial happening up in Bradford, which is a very diverse city with a lot of like Asian British students, so those of South Asian descent. And there they've been doing quite a lot of co-design around data donation as well. And even there it's a challenge with a very, they have a real kind of professional co-design setup that naturally the keen beans come forward first. And it takes a lot of time to build trust in the community to make sure you're getting everybody's views. And they do have quite a lot of concern still about data donation, that we're getting those people who are maybe less privacy concerned, that also because of their lives need a bit less concern about the privacy of their data or what they're seeing. And so, as this was ultimately to give advice to cohort studies like them, I think we're still quite a long way off for this to be rolled out across very large portions of the population. However, what is nice with cohort studies is that even if only a small amount of people take part in the data donation process, we do see who's not taking part, and we can start having those understandings of who are we missing and how can we design the process better. So I think partially we need to start, you just need to start doing it, but we need to iterate and reflect consistently about this and understand that the results we're getting might not be representative of the full population until we understand that in more detail. So I think also in the UK, where our ethics, or at least we've taken a much more conservative approach with ethics, so we do not collect their private messages. We did not collect, for example, what they're typing on their phones, etc. So for TikTok, we're mainly just collecting what they're seeing, and it's public content. And for Instagram, we're also quite constrained in what we can collect. So I think we've taken quite a conservative approach comparison to, I think there's potentially a bit of a different ethics appetite in the US. Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, that leads well into the next question, which was curious about whether and how you had to educate your IRB in addition to participants And if so, how you engaged in working with your IRB and what challenges and solutions there were in that process. Because you said it took months, and I was really interested to hear that they had concerns even about number of video views as a potentially like increasing risk of identification. So yeah, curious to hear how you worked with the IRB and what that looked like.
Yeah, so for example, initially we wanted to collect what videos young people were liking on TikTok.
Right.
And then they got concerned that naturally, if there are only 3 people liking a certain video and one of them is your participant, you could triangulate across their liking profile and re-identify them. So that was a battle we kind of lost. And so we didn't collect that data. But also we need to think really deeply, is this actual data that is useful to us now? I think naturally, so in a way, I actually think that increasingly these sorts of data processes, they go beyond, they need very specialist ethical evaluation that I think it's difficult to provide at university level. So I really welcome the UK's investment in a smart data donation service in one university that will provide national infrastructure for this. And they will host that data and they will go through the legal and ethical processes. So personally, we're doing the last few. So we're currently doing a data donation study in clinical groups. We're potentially doing one with an experiment. But I think once that national infrastructure gets put in place, I will not do that again, because I think it's very risky and things progress. And I think it's a full-time job to really understand the data security and make sure that that is appropriate. So I think potentially, in the Netherlands, they're doing that as well. Like, how can we outsource some of this to hubs of real expertise? Don't know, Val, if we did anything else to educate our IRB. I sometimes, I sometimes I'm concerned when it's too quick to go through IRB, because I'm like, this person really didn't understand.
Right.
And it's just somebody who's quite stressed. So I think it's both that and naturally then also legal. It's the legal teams on like, how do you then use the data, which often are much more conservative for us, at least. So it's both ethics and legal. We need to educate.
We have a separate information technology security. Do you also have that as a separate office that you have to go through?
No, but I know colleagues who do.
Okay.
So I'm sure it will appear in your future for us. Yeah, Val.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say we did try to frame it correctly, saying that we are so instead of saying we're collecting social media data, which sounds a lot like scraping everything, we say that we're asking participants to voluntarily share, donate data download packages that platforms have already legally required to provide them under GDPR, a data protection law. So that clarifies a lot of the legal and voluntary nature that they're concerned about.
That's really helpful. The next question ties to extracting the multimodal video content. And the question is, did you consult with adolescent participants, especially with less straightforward decisions like identifying gender?
Christina?
Maybe this was not so clear in my presentation. So obviously you cannot ask the people in the video. And I think the images which were most difficult is when you only see parts of people. So it's not that you have always like this person where you see their hair or maybe their full body. And sometimes you see them only from hindsight, or they are like covered by people. And then at least I think this is also a bit the question, how important it is for your research question to get this really right. And as the technical limitations were the main problem, we took a bit, I would say, a simplistic approach. because it otherwise, as I said, you cannot ask these people in the videos. And also, as we know, large language models and computer vision models, multimodal models are full of bias and stereotypes. So it's really difficult to come up with a perfect solution which is scalable. So I think this is the point. I think you can have these conversations when you have a limited amount of videos where you can also do manual checks to get it really right when it's important for your research question. But here we went for a simple solution which would work on stills from 350,000 videos, so where you just cannot check all of them.
Yeah, I think I did have a grant which sadly got rejected on very good reviews. I'm still seething, as you can see, where we would have done a lot more co-creation with young people about kind of how do we code certain things, what are the where some of this we're interested in, like sexualization, and they're doing more co-creation, so talking to young people who are not in the videos but who are representatives to understand how we best use the models. Currently not doing that as such. We are planning to consult with our youth advisory board on this project, I think early next year. But I think for us, we're only coding what we need for that specific research question. But yeah, I think everybody can understand that things like gender expression, it becomes, as we're trying to show in this presentation, starts becoming quite technical, and you need to make a lot of decisions and without a lot of kind of things to hold on to in terms of what the right or the wrong decision is on where we put cutoffs.
Yeah. Maybe also to add that this is really about a lot of data. So when you have like over 300,000 videos and each of them is like 30 seconds long or maybe 15. So this is a lot of stills. So we need a process which can be automated. And probably if you were to really do research into gender presentations in videos, I feel this is like a whole new massive project, so to say. So it's about a bit what you want to know, as you said, Amy, and also what are the time resources, maybe?
That makes a lot of sense. I wonder if you could just, and I know we just have a minute left, maybe talk a little bit about, though, before, what your training validation stage looks like before, to refine the model before you then apply it to the 350,000. So yeah, I'm assuming you have a subset that you're training on, and then can you just talk us through a little bit what that looks like?
Yeah, actually, it's a whole pipeline where each step needs validation. And so at the moment, I'm still working on this. So I've always a first step where I see whether the threshold, the modeling, also whether it roughly works. And then once I've refined this, I manual check a larger amount of videos, because the less errors a model makes, the easier it is. So this is when I use existing models, which I can use through prompting. And one stage which will still come for this complex psychological construct where we have training data. It works such that you have a training data set and it does an internal validation. And once this classifier is trained, you apply to a holdout set, which wasn't part of the training. But there are different models involved. So yeah.
Yeah, super interesting.
The process.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I know we're at 1:00, but thank you so much, Valerie, Christina, and Amy, for this fantastic overview. And I know I'd love to ask you 50 more questions, but we will take a break for 10 minutes and then come back with our next set of speakers. But thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.